advisors Paulie and Silvio, or even if they're one-off characters who last a single episode, like the stripper Tracy. In our previous expansive character analysis video, part of a new series I am doing, please subscribe for more if you haven't already done so, we took a look at Tony's consigliere Silvio Dante and his key moments throughout the series. Today I wanted to take a look at another character who exhibits similarly quiet and reserved traits, who is very rarely the centre of attention but is very much a staple of the show. Bobby Baccalieri Jr. or Bobby Baccalieri II. Bobby is a recurring character who was a mobster in Uncle Junior's crew, being upped as a matter of circumstance, running Junior's loan sharking business and becoming Junior's carer when he is under house arrest and his health deteriorates. Bobby's wife dies in an accident, leaving behind 2 children, after which Bobby marries Tony's sister Janice, an opportunist who nonetheless manages to coach Bobby out of his depression. Bobby's this man, who starts off as a bumbling fat buffoon, shy and oafish, becomes a key man within Tony's inner circle and the underboss of the Sopranos crew, third in line only behind Tony and Silvio. That could potentially mean if Tony is king of the family, how do you like them apples? But of course, mistakenly thinking the New York-New Jersey war is over, Bobby goes to a toy store out in the open and is ambushed and killed by New York goons. Bobby is portrayed as a gentle giant with a soft-spoken demeanour, in contrast to many of the other characters in the show who are more aggressive and volatile. There's a childlike quality about him, something that never truly leaves him in spite of his evolution over the course of the show. Much like how Christopher wears a cap in the car with Tony in his first scene and then again in his last scene before his death, and this is used to symbolise Chris's lack of arc and growth, Bobby is known to have a hobby for building and playing with toy trains, and he of course dies in a children's train store, perhaps implying that Bobby was always a child at heart, not made for the mafia life. He's depicted as a loyal and dedicated member of the Sopranos crew, known for his reliability and level-headedness, which comes as a surprise given he starts off as someone who is universally considered a buffoon. And not just a buffoon, but an actively weak man. He's a made guy, and yet he's never popped his cherry.
They make anybody and everybody over there.
And it's implied he rode off the reputation of his father, Old Man Bacala the Terminator, then rode off the relationship with Junior, and then with Tony himself.
I'll tell you this, Bobby. You can't hide behind this brother-in-law shit forever. You're an okay guy, but each and every man is judged on his own merit.
But Bacala is far from a simple-minded mental midget. In fact, he is one of the strongest characters in the show, not least because he had to go through the trauma of his wife's death. Tony makes his sick old father perform a hit which kills him, he is manipulated by Janice into a relationship, he is used and abused by Tony, Jr. and the rest of the guys, and he is forced to do a hit by Tony because the man wants to drag him down to his level and punish him for beating him in a fight. Today, let's do a deep dive into the man's character. Let me know who you'd like to see analysed next in the comment section below, and be sure to let me know what you think of Bobby Bacala. I appreciate your thoughts. Bacala's first appearance is from the aftermath of Tony and Junior's war in Season 2. Tony tells Junior to get Bobby out of hiding, as he wants to use him as a runner, and the only reason Bobby's even alive is because Tony doesn't think he's important or effective enough to take out. According to Puss, Bacala's always been a lazy bastard, and his first appearance doesn't suggest otherwise. His belly arrives in the room 3 minutes before he does. He looks like a loser, awkwardly shuffling around and looking at the floor over his bumbling stomach. Boy, is he fat! Interestingly, Steve Schirripa was wearing a fat suit in the earlier seasons, but the Sopranos creator David Chase must have considered him fat enough on his own later on, as Schirripa was told he didn't need to wear a fat suit in the later seasons. Anyway, Bacala's first appearance is nothing to write home about. It's like a roast session, but a hint of the man's potential is there. You have to understand, he could easily be walking into his death here for all he knows. One wrong look and he could be taken out. And yet we get a taste of Bacala's potential as a mobster when he says,
I don't think you got reason to talk to me this way.
The balls to say this to the new boss when your entire crew has been taken out and you're surrounded by your opponent's heavies. Bacala really did stand his ground and handled the situation well. Right up until the last line anyway.
To the victor belongs the spoils.
which probably sounded a lot more impressive in his head than when he said it. There's things that he says behind Tony's back too, the insensitive cocksucker moment for instance, that suggests there's a lot more fire in this guy than is first apparent. What, you telling me you never pondered that? Bobby, I argue, is actually the strong silent type that Tony feels isn't around anymore. Sure, he has his moments and was emotional at times, but Bacala was kept on the sidelines for a long time and needed a mentor. He needed guidance and experience to grow in the mob, to develop, something he got working directly under Junior, and once he was no longer required to be Junior's exclusive carer, that's when he started to prove his worth. Other characters, and by extension the audience, don't notice his competence because, like Silvio, there's no drama about Bobby. He's just a guy who was Junior's carer, and that's all we make of him initially. But he's as gangster as any of them, just a quiet one who wants to be left alone with his family, his trains, and his White Castles. And he's practically never screwed up. He took part in the beating of the protesters in Season 2, he threatens the union rep with ease. His only real screw-up on the job was when he got jumped. The eye patch situation, whatever happened there. But that could happen to anyone. I mean, the guy waited 40 minutes in line for stool softener. That takes real dedication. This kind of mischaracterization of Bobby from fans who often see the man as a cuddly sweet teddy bear frustrated me, and is actually what prompted me to make my video Why You're Wrong About Bobby Bacala, where I argued he was not a good guy at all, that his soft demeanor makes you forget what he really is. And I don't want to go over the same points in this video, but let me just run down some actions that proves Bobby was just as much of a gangster as anyone. Think on this, Burger Boys. A union leader who is standing up for his workers and trying to stop them getting ripped off is threatened with death by Bobby. Bobby ran a book, cracked skulls at a work stoppage, and ran a hit which resulted in the death of 2 innocent civilians. Remember, it was he who ran the Phil Leotardo botched hit. He has an incredibly comfortable role in the mob and yet goes to Tony asking for more jobs. And even Tony says being off the streets is a good thing these days. But in simple terms, what Bobby is asking for is more opportunities to go out and take money from vulnerable people. Bobby's father didn't want the life for him, and in the early days he clearly wasn't made for it, so we can't give him a pass and say he was born into it, which is an excuse Tony likes to use for himself. It applies even less so for Bacala, who could have lived a life adjacent to the mob instead of in it. When he's promoted in Season 4, he tells Tony right to his face he thinks it should have happened sooner. He tells Junior nonchalantly that we'll go after a juror to make him feel better, a small offhand comment that has very dark implications. He ran a scam selling expired osteoporosis medicine. He pushes Tony to get him to tell Hesh to get fucked for his 200k, which, as well as being cruel, is straight up bad advice. Bobby skims off a garbage asbestos dump that uses imported workers to handle it unsafely, something which has shown to lead to painful deaths, and his only concern is his envelope. Yes, he was manipulated by Janice, but he shouldn't have been that dumb, and I doubt that the thought of getting closer to the boss's family didn't flash across his mind at some point. And of course, the murder of a young, innocent civilian who was trying to get custody of his child. Bobby even had a photo of the man with his family, and now that child is without a father. Oh sure, Bobby cried when he did it and he hugged his daughter afterwards. Well, tell that to the boy's father, I'm sure he'll feel better. And didn't Bobby say he wanted more responsibility? Well, this is increased responsibility. Silvio killed Adriana, Chrissy took out the cop, Tony killed the rat, Pussy was taken out by his friends. This is the job. Don't ask for more responsibility and then cry when you get it, regardless of what Tony's intention was to give Bacala this hit. Bobby is an evil mobster. That is the state in which he left this world. The flip side to his evilness is that what makes him morally bad is what makes him an effective gangster. And when he was a comparatively decent guy in the early seasons, he was a poor mobster. The better you are in the mob, the more of your soul you lose. But Bobby always had the goods, always had the potential, and as his standing in the crew rose, that allowed him to change the way he reacts to things within his mob circle, to no longer be considered a goof. He laughs at Chris with the crew when Paulie roasts him in the Bing. He smirks when Chris is complaining to Tony about Paulie. Old Bobby didn't have the station to do such things, he wouldn't have even wanted to, but by Season 6, the power dynamics regarding him and the rest of the crew had changed. Bobby's behaviour is relative to his environment. Around the mobsters in early seasons, he has that "aw shucks" attitude, but the way we see him with the union worker is how Bobby would be like with civilians. Later, when he rises in the ranks, he doesn't need to swallow insults from other gangsters, and instead squares up to them. In fact, that's actually a very interesting phenomenon. Maybe I should do a video on it. Keep an eye on how characters are able to get away with breaking balls a lot more once their position in the crew is upped. In season 6, for example, Chris makes 2 consecutive jokes about Sylvia not being able to perform in the romance department, something which would be unthinkable in season 1. Their relationship hasn't changed much, but now Chrissy is a captain. Anyway, Bobby starting off as a laughingstock and morphing into a person to be respected and taken seriously is perfectly symbolized in Pine Barrens when Tony laughs hysterically at his hunting gear, only to realize later on Bobby knew what he was doing and was the only one in the situation who came prepared. Since we're on the subject of narrative symbolism, I also like to mirror this with when Bobby is getting blasted by Tony as he slowly takes off his conductor's hat, symbolizing his subservience to the mob life which offers him very little at the expense of his natural disposition, which is a normal family guy who likes playing with trains. Tony's realization that Bobby is a capable guy comes in stages over the course of the show. Sometimes it's in moments of reflection, like when they both travel to Pine Barrens, or when they're both on the boat in season 6, which miraculously doesn't sink. And other times it has to be screamed down Tony's throat.
To be his age and not to be a captain. He works so hard for you, and what does he get? Merciless ridicule.
It does seem Tony's opinion of Bobby wavers up and down, dependent on whatever mood Tony is in, and just how resentful he is feeling at any given moment. And often Bobby is the target of resentment that Tony has for Janice or Junior. Bobby has negative traits that are easy to make fun of, like his weight, and in fact early on he comes off as maybe even on the spectrum. Maybe that's why he makes bizarre efforts to act natural and organic, like leaning on Tony's car. Like, who does that? He has awkward social skills, and his attempts to warm up to Tony and make conversations are misguided at best. The bear joke, the Quasimodo comment. Maybe he just hasn't gotten how miserable Tony is just yet, and the two start to get on in season 6 when both are almost as miserable as each other. His reaction to Junior's joke,
I get it. He drives a Lincoln. What?
is funnier than the joke. Like Bobby, you're supposed to laugh uncontrollably when your boss makes a joke. It again implies the man might be autistic, and at the same time, he lacks the mob mentorship early on in the show. Although saying that, within the same scene, his mob instincts are highlighted by picking up on Dick Barone's message. The rise of Bobby Bacala is so drastic, even other characters notice it.
Plus Silvio Dante, and we think Bobby Baccalieri.
That Mortadel's number 3. He used to be Junior Sopranos' driver.
I'm his brother-in-law.
You think New York is really gonna come after you, Bobby?
Or Chris watching Bobby and Tony talk business at the barbecue, or the annoyed look Chris shoots Bobby when he comes in to complain. Paulie saying,
"Watch your fat fucking mouth,"
may have been him projecting frustration at the fact that Bobby has basically leapfrogged him in rank. Even in season 4, Chris is surprised to see Bacala in the mix when Tony tasks him with whacking the cop.
Was that Bobby Bacala?
But Bobby's rise is not without merit, even if it's also a commentary on the dwindling nature of Tony's crew and the lack of loyalty around him. Some might feel it's lazy writing, but the fact is, Bobby wasn't any dumber than any of the other guys and had terrific opportunities to grow. The Quasimodo comment is no worse than Carmine Sr. saying there's no stigmata these days, or Tony saying he could technically have not made penisary contact with her Volvo. Plus, I heard that the Quasimodo line was originally written for Paulie, but the actor had a reduced role at the time due to injury. And that line really does feel like something more in line with what Paulie would say, as an avid listener of Sun Tzu audiobooks. Bobby lived in the world of the mob. His old man was in it. He spent years with Junior, gaining knowledge every day, observing, listening, learning.
Pay attention, you just may learn something here.
He's present when the legend Feech has returned from the can, when Richie tries to turn Junior against Tony and Junior mules it over. He's almost always there when Tony and Junior talk business. He probably had the best opportunity of anyone in the show, being in the room when bosses are making decisions but not having to get his hands very dirty, and nothing much to focus on aside from picking up Junior's hemorrhoid cream. And he might never chip in because that's his personality. He's shy.
Shyness is a curse.
And in this case, it's a blessing because the ones who do say things at the wrong moments are guys like Jackie Jr. and Chrissy.
I don't want to say nothing, Tony.
You don't want to get yourself in trouble.
Better to keep your mouth shut and let everybody think you might be stupid than to open your mouth and confirm it. Bobby and Tony's relationship is one of the most fascinating of the show. Bobby's evolution from someone who Tony despises and dismisses to being his top confidant, pulling substantial weight, is fascinating. You know who had an arc? You're looking at him, asshole. There's even small moments where Tony starts to acknowledge Bobby, like at Livia's wake where he hugs Tony and says, "My father is very old too." Again, awkward delivery, as Tony's mother isn't old, she's dead. But you do get what he's trying to say, and Tony's reaction is one of mild surprise that Bobby is being so genuine to him. But as we all know, Tony was also extremely spiteful of Bobby, which really stems from a sense of jealousy. In season 2, Bobby represents Junior, so Tony lays out all of his abuse and insecurities about his uncle on Bobby. Bobby seems to have a good relationship with his father, who used to take him hunting, and crucially, Bacala Sr. didn't want his son in the life. Tony's dad was also in the mob, and he never used to do stuff with Tony, and Tony always resented the fact that Johnny Boy didn't make a life outside of the mob for his son. Bobby has a good rapport with both his own dad and Junior at a time when Tony and Junior hated each other. It's like Bobby and Tony are adopted sons of Junior, only one is in a better standing and the other is hopelessly jealous. Bobby and his first wife are also stable, unlike Tony's home life. Bobby didn't have to kill anybody to make his bones, unlike Tony. And Tony even has a flashback about it in season 6, showing it still affects him. Bobby marries Tony's sister, which comes with its own insecurities, as well as him being dangerously close to the throne. Even when Bobby marries the volatile Janice, sure there are problems, but even then his family life is better than Tony's, and the kids are very stable for children who lost their mother and had her replaced with Janice. Bobby is the happy wanderer type, which the show establishes Tony is fiercely jealous of. Bobby's heart is as fat as his ass, whereas Tony is always miserable. After Tony is shot and he's insecure about his manliness, there's a shot that lingers on Bacala playing basketball, showing us that Tony is actively comparing himself, his own fitness, to Bobby's. Over the course of the show, Bacala has been getting fitter, symbolizing his efficiency as a mobster but also Tony's resentment of him. Tony even copies Bobby's order at the diner.
Imitation to form of flattery.
And we haven't even started on the Sopranos home movie scene, where Bacala punches Tony and the duo fight. Bacala the clear winner, though Tony was recovering from the shooting and Bobby did start it off with a sucker punch. This is at a time where Tony was already fashioning Bobby for a higher position. This scene on the boat tells us so. But rather than cause his downfall, perhaps the punch even accelerated Bobby's rise. Tony was furious, but on a subconscious level he would have respected that Bacala stood up for his woman, that this is a man worth taking under his wing, and he began loving him like a brother-in-law, and Bacala subsequently goes from strength to strength. Either that or his hand was played. If he came back to Jersey and reversed the decision to up Bobby, the crew would know that something happened and maybe Bobby would leak it that he beat Tony in a fight. But let's go back to it. Tony comes to Bobby's home invited, and as well as being a miserable narcissist who always dampens the conversation, think to when he talks about the drowned kid when everybody's relaxing, a trait he inherited from his mother. Tony slurs Bobby's wife, then repeats it after Bobby respectfully but defiantly establishes the red line. There's a lot of dynamics at play here. Maybe Bobby should have let it go, but you've got to give him props for decking Tony. Someone finally putting Mr. Type A personality in his place. In the culture the two live in, the mobsters see the women in their lives as extensions of themselves. If you insult their women, you're insulting them. It's like when Richie Aprile says to Chrissy, "Give her your last name, then it's not my problem." In other words, I am Adriana's uncle, she is under my protection. Once you marry her, then she's under your subspecies. Tony beating Coco after his insult is another example, with Tony repeating, my daughter, my daughter." It isn't just that it's his daughter, it's that it's his daughter. The clearest example is Johnny Sachs spelling it out for us when he tells Carmine Sr. he insulted my wife's honor, my honor. This is a matter of dignity and honor for the mobsters. Janice belongs to Bobby now, not Tony. It isn't so much about the women being hurt, but that they lose respect. Though I will caveat this by saying any man will feel angry when his wife is being so openly insulted, even if she has no problem with it and it's her brother. But when Tony made the first joke, it was about Janice. When he did it again, it was about Bobby. He essentially forced Bobby's hand. He was testing him. Bobby has already checked him appropriately, and ironically, it was Tony who got offended. But Tony goes in harder, and now it's either a case of losing face and doing nothing, or raising the comeback along with Tony's raised insult. It's like poker. Tony essentially dared Bobby to do something, and Bobby went ahead and did it. This is one of the great ironies of Bobby. Other mobsters consider him weak and unmanly, yet punching Tony, boss or no boss, after his wife is insulted is one of the most manliest actions in the show. In Arabic, there is a word called ghira, which I can't find an English equivalent for, but it's defined as a word that encompasses the concept of a person's dislike or displeasure over someone else sharing a right or privilege that belongs to them. It carries a sense of earnest concern or zeal and can be seen as a form of protective jealousy. Bobby's punch was his ghira coming out in full swing. If Tony said that about another mobster's wife, even his own subordinates, it would have to be addressed. But I think a lot of characters would actually allow Tony to say whatever he wants about their women. They actually lack the bravery that Bobby has. Sticking with Bobby's unmanly reputation, it's interesting that at Karen's funeral, the other mobster wives are talking about how he never took a guma. They're practically creaming for him, yearning for a husband like Bobby. Why do you think Janice went after him so hard? She knew he'd never raise a hand to her like Richie did. Of course, with the fight, there's lack of clarity in the air as to what exactly the situation was. Is it a mob relationship here at the lake house, or a brother-in-law one? Family or family? If it happened at the Bing in front of the guys, Bobby would probably end up as the Decades special at Satrial's, but the situation was more two brothers having a fight, rather than a boss and an underboss. But no doubt, Tony relished exercising his power as boss, scaring Bobby, making him think he was going to get whacked and punishing him with the hit. Bobby beat Tony's ass, and Tony took Bobby's soul. By the way, seeing as though we're talking about the Sopranos Home Movies episode, it allows me to address something from the Why You're Wrong About Bobby video. Bobby said they should build a wall, and I talked about how he was a hypocrite for it given his father's entry to the US, and a lot of people in the comment section pulled me up on it thinking I was making some kind of liberal political comment. Well, I wasn't. In contrast, the people making these comments were perhaps projecting their own political outlook on my comments. Because what I was referring to was that in the same conversation that Bobby says we should build a wall now, he just finished mentioning how his grandfather didn't come over from Ellis Islands like most Italians, but instead had to come down from Canada illegally, adding because of his previous record.
His father, my grandpa, come into the country originally through Montreal, illegally.
The comment is supposed to be typically ironic and hypocritical, not political, and also to show how second and third generation immigrants assimilate into US culture and have different sensibilities from their parents. There's another line that Bobby says which is supposed to serve a similar purpose.
I won't mind sitting on my ass all day, smoking mushrooms and collecting government checks.
Which he says while literally sitting on his ass. Anyway, Bobby displays a rare kind of toughness, like Silvio, and it's interesting to mention Sil because Bobby and Silvio end up as Tony's two closest advisors, and Silvio clearly approves of Bobby's rise as he doesn't cause dysentery in the ranks like he did when Chrissy was upped, as I discussed in my Silvio analysis. Anyway, Bobby is tough, but he's gentle. His anger comes about when his family are put into jeopardy, like Tony insulting his wife or his children being put in danger by Paulie with the ride. He's an emotional man, loves his family. It takes a certain quality to allow ridicule of himself, early on at least, but to reserve his fury for when his family is affected. Think to that scene where he says to Junior, "I never ask you for anything," but he's desperate for his father not to perform the hit. As mentioned, he is actually very manly. I've no idea why Vito had such a problem with him in season 6, he should have greased his union. Take a look at this scene.
Boss put 18 plus on this, maybe 25.
Yeah?
What's your problem?
Nothing, I'm excited. What do you want?
Chris is shocked that Bobby is acting so stoic and isn't as visibly excited as he is. It's a great contrast for their characters. One is strong, masculine, handsome like George Raft and Rubenesque to boot. And it's fitting that it's these two, because it's Chris who Bobby replaced in Tony's pecking order. All of a sudden that "to the victor belongs the spoils" quote doesn't sound so stupid. Bobby is the anti-Christopher. He steps up at precisely the time Tony sees that Chris is not his successor, and he now sees there is another viable option. He's reliable. He knows when to talk and when not to. He gets his collections on time and doesn't make stupid jokes. Not anymore, anyway. He evolved and grew, something which Chris failed to do. He's not an addict. He's not a snake like Paulie. He's not a rat like Puss. He's not unstable like Ralph. He's just a strong family man, a dedicated father and a loving husband. I'm in awe of him. He's what the other mobsters pretend to be, but behind the scenes they're having cheese graters used on their privates. Take another scene. Bobby meets with Tony to ask for better jobs. He sees him in his office in a professional capacity, rather than talk business at his home, using brother-in-law privileges. And he skips all the preambles that everyone else does, and he gets straight to the point, without asking for any special treatment, only an opportunity to earn more. You know, honestly, now that I think about it, had he not died, I could actually see Bobby becoming boss after Tony. Sounds crazy, but he had all the qualities, and Silvio showed he wasn't suited for it anyway. Bobby was the next best thing. Bobby is always aware of Tony. It would be interesting to see what Bobby's like when Tony's not in the picture. He sure started acting vulture-like when Silvio was acting boss, which is something I discussed in the Silvio video. For sure, at the very least, gangster Bobby is terrifying, like when he goes after Paulie and has to be held back, or when he squares up to Paulie at the Bing. Like they say, it's the quiet ones you have to watch out for. If you're lost in Pine Barrens and the mob is after you, in all seriousness, the marksman Bobby with a bow and arrow, with the hunting training and killer instincts of his father, is probably the last person you want on your tail. Chris and Paulie struggle to nab the Russian, but Bobby could probably shoot Ginny's mole off from miles away, and after he shoots you, he'll probably fucking eat you. Although he did shoot someone in the ass when he was going for the fleshy part of the thigh, but perhaps that was on purpose after he got shortchanged by the rapper. Hooking up with Janice was a major part of Bobby's downfall. As she did with Richie, she would have been the one egging him on to make more money, to increase his standing. Rather embarrassingly, sometimes she came directly to Tony to vouch for her husband. But the push to up Bobby put him on the radar of the likes of New York. He was in the meeting with Phil Leotardo when even Paulie wasn't. From a mobster's perspective, he could have been content as being a middle-tier guy, someone like Benny. He'd have time for his trains and his children, but in his vulnerability, he allowed himself to get manipulated by Janice. She obviously did good for him, mob hierarchy-wise, but long-term, it destroyed Bobby. Even he himself recognized a change was taking place. As he says, "This used to be a good house." In a way, Bobby was eaten by his surroundings. His first wife may have kept him on the path, because their relationship was one of love, it was wholesome. She might have not been the most materialistic of people, which meant Bobby was content with his position, but then she dies. Even her death itself may have hardened Bobby. The scene where he threatens the union guy was shortly after. Perhaps the grief inspired him. But through Janice's pushing, he became a more effective mobster but a worse person. By mob standards, Bobby is tragic because he started off as a happy, successful family man whose family was torn apart, starting with the tragic death of his wife and the insertion of Janice into his life. He doesn't realize it before it's too late, but as his stature rises, he slowly loses everything. As Boardwalk Empire told us, you can't be half a gangster. And eventually Bobby goes all the way, going from the best of a bad bunch, no Gumar, loving father and husband, to becoming just like the rest of them. He loses his innocence with his first murder, and I couldn't stand how obnoxious he became, sucking up to Tony in typical mob subordinate fashion like the 200k line, instead of the old Bobby who actually spoke his mind to Tony, or not shaking hands with the guy on the site. It also looks like he started to sleep with the strippers from the club. You do see one with him when Chris is getting roasted, but this was after he hooked up with Janice, so he gets a pash for that. Bobby Bacala is a character who never needed to big himself up and show how much of a gangster he was, but his actions throughout the show quietly assured those willing to see that he was indeed a force to be reckoned with. I mean, look at the way he talked to Tony after the fight, trying to play it down and mitigate the situation. Obviously he was also thinking about his safety, but he could easily have taken Tony's bait once again, if his ego had let him. I do wonder though, how much of Bobby in Season 6B was him actually having changed, and how much he was actually playing up to Tony. I prefer thinking that his comment about Hesh's 200k to Tony was him trying to suck up to the man to stay firmly in his good books. I like to think the old Bobby was in there somewhere, but in all honesty, I think we lost the endearing Bacala that we had in earlier seasons. Bobby dies as a murdering gangster, estranged from his son as implied by his tragic last line, which carries a lot of weight about where the relationship is between father and son.
Your son will like this too. Looks fast.
He don't care.
Bobby's death scene is probably the best shot hit in the show, and I don't want to talk about it too much here because it deserves its own video, but it's quite fitting, symbolically, that he dies buying an 8,000 toy train set. Throughout the series, we see examples of those in the life trading their souls for shiny toys and objects, their love of materialism overpowering and eventually taking over their morality. Tony and his boat, even though he's had so many conversations with Dr. Milfy. Carmela and her jewellery, even though she was warned by the psychiatrist. Chris's jaw-dropping at the luxury lounge, and choosing to give up Adriana when he sees that family at the gas station, even though the two had a great relationship. And here is Bobby, with his toys, ostensibly more innocent by comparison, but just as corrupting. In the end, he is murdered by an incredibly expensive child's toy that he knows his son no longer cares about. He traded his soul for something valueless. He chose the life over having a real life. He lost what's actually important, and on top of that, he knows it. It also feels like him yearning for that simpler, nostalgic time when it was just him, Karen, Sophia, and Junior, a happy family whose boys enjoyed playing with their trained toys. But now, Karen's dead, replaced with Janice. Junior has no interest in he and his father's old hobbies, and Sophia is now in the hands of Janice now that Bobby is dead. And finally, there's quite an irony in Bacala saying, "You probably don't even hear it when it happens." When he did hear it, he did see it, and he holds his shiny toy in his hand as he's gunned down. So I think we'll end it there. This video's gotten about as big as Bobby's stomach, and I'm just about as exhausted as he was when he got out of that car that one time. And even then, there's still more that can be said about the man. Let me know what you think of Bobby Bacala down in the comment section below. Let me know who you would like to see have a video done on them next. Check out the one I did on Silvio Dante, subscribe to the channel, become a channel member for early and exclusive content, and thanks for watching.